Good morning and welcome everyone to the very first session of this year's Brighteye Edtech Startup Festival. Brighteye is an early stage edtech fund investing in seed and Series A across Europe. We announced the closing of our second fund at 100 million euros earlier this summer, and we are, of course, always looking to connect with you founders and edtech teams out there. My name is Hege, and I'm head of community at Brighteye, working on our portfolio support, communications, and events like this festival. It's amazing to see so many people joining for this panel on product, with a particular focus on integrating AI in your edtech product. I'm happy to introduce Ben, one of our founding partners at Brighteye, who will be moderating the conversation and introducing, of course, the brilliant panel that we've got. So enjoy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Wirz. I'm a partner at Brighteye. As Hege mentioned, Brighteye is the most active edtech-focused venture capital fund in Europe. And as such, we're constantly getting asked about how artificial intelligence is going to impact the future of learning. And I have a set of rote answers, which I will share with you briefly. But the truth is, like many venture capitalists, I learn and think about the future of artificial intelligence primarily by talking to smart folks in and out of our portfolio about what they're doing, what they're seeing, what they're experiencing. And that allows me to sound smarter eventually over time. I will be honest with everyone here today and say that I'm still very much in the learning phase. I think what I can say for sure, and this panel, just to be more precise, AI has been around for a while and has been machine learning has been applied in a lot of different ways across learning. Today, we're going to focus on generative AI, specifically, which I think has certainly catalyzed the conversation and eaten up a lot of the attention in terms of, I think rightfully so, has really sparked the imagination in terms of what automation and technology can do for learning. What I've seen so far is that in terms of generative AI's impact on the learning field, it is primarily making both students and teachers more productive. That is to say, they're both students and teachers are using generative AI quite actively in terms of producing content. 61% of students, according to a recent study by Quizlet on the state of AI, are using generative AI to some extent to produce work. What's interesting is 64% of teachers reported using AI, so actually more teachers than students are using it, but it tends to be very much on the production side. What I haven't seen as much, although I'm eager to ask the panel today, is generative AI being used in terms of the iterative process of actually learning and habit formation that forms a lot of what we think of as education. So I'm joined here today with that somewhat candid introduction. I'm joined here today by people who I'm really eager to ask about what they're seeing. Just in order from left to right on my screen, Jono, who's Chief Product Officer at Zen-Educate, one of our portfolio companies. Kirsten Campbell-Howes, who is Chief Product Officer at Busuu and now works with a number of edtech companies, and Arnd Aschentrup, who is CEO of Tandem, again, a Brighteye portfolio company. I'm going to let each of them talk more briefly about themselves so you get a better sense of who they are and what they do, and then we'll dive right into their use of AI and what they're seeing. So I'll start with Jono, just because he's first on my screen.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. So just a little bit about me. Yeah, I'm Chief Product Officer at Zen-Educate. My background is actually new product development and engineering design, sort of physical products. And I studied for a PhD out in the Bay Area at UC Berkeley for that a while ago. And since coming back to the UK, I have spent time running UX and design at a company called Nutmeg, which was a fintech scale-up for over 7 years. And I'm now coming up to 6 years at Zen-Educate, running product as a whole on our 4 product delivery teams. I should say, I think obviously this is EdTech, and we're part of the Brighteye's portfolio. We're not a traditional EdTech company, and perhaps in some of the senses that the others are here. So Zen Educate, we work very closely with schools and we work with teachers, but we connect schools with supply teachers is our core business. And so, we started with this sort of mission of being like the Uber for supply teachers. So teachers can sign up, go through the checks, they have a profile on our platform. Schools can use our platform when somebody says they're not going to be in. They can instead of phoning up an agency and then phoning around and just everything getting lost, they can just dial up the platform, do some searches, request people. Teachers have everything they need to go in and have successful days of work. So that's where we come from. We also do a lot of, as we extended, a lot of more long-term stuff, so which is a bit more like interviews and trials, which are required in that. And so all of that bit of like candidate onboarding, interactions with schools, making sure that teachers are having good days teaching, that kind of thing is all part of what I care about day to day. So yeah, maybe a slightly different perspective from some of the other companies here, but that's what's interesting.
Okay, hello everyone, nice to meet you. I'm Kirsten Campbell-Howes. I've been working in and with edtech startups for a very long time, more than 20 years, can't quite believe it. Most recently, I was Chief Learning Officer at Busuu, which is a very big global language learning company, over 120 million learners learning different languages together. And I first started working with AI about 8 years ago, I would say. And I quite like the person who calls AI applied statistics. I think that's kind of a better way of talking about it a lot. So I first started working with it at Busuu, helping learners to kind of personalize their learning journey and be able to focus on what's meaningful for them. Since I left Busuu, I've been working with a lot of different edtech startups as a consultant and advisor, including a few in the Brighteye portfolio. Lots of startups obviously doing stuff with AI, some really good, some a little bit more questionable, I think. And I think AI and generative AI is both a bit overhyped and a bit misunderstood. So hopefully, as we go through this talk, we can clear up some of the misunderstandings and look at what the real potential is, I would say. That's me.
Great. And I think Arnd, why don't you chime in next?
Yeah, thanks, Ben, and thanks for organizing this. So my name is Arnd Aschentrup. I'm one of the co-founders of Tandem. Tandem is the global language learning community with now over 20 million members who come really from all over the world to practice languages together in tandem, in text chats, in audio chats, and video calls. And also for a couple of months now in live audio rooms that we call language parties. And I mean, the main conceit of Tandem is that you can't really learn a language without speaking it. So after doing something like Busuu, what Kirsten worked on, or something like Duolingo or Babbel, people feel the next step to fluency is actually speaking with real practice. And in Tandem, you meet fellow learners to make progress together. And yeah, that's maybe what makes Tandem so special. It's not just a learning tool. It's not just algorithms, even though there's a lot of AI already infused into the app itself, even before the wave of generative AI. But it's not just that. It's not just a learning tool. At the heart of it is really the human connection. And that many of our members are with us for many, many years, because making friends all over the world and the ability to get access to cultural exchange, even if you're not super rich or you don't have access to travel as much as others, it's been a big deal. And so people are usually coming to learn new languages, but they're discovering the whole world, making friends around the world. And yeah, I oftentimes now get more messages on Tandem when something interesting is happening on the world than from my real friends on WhatsApp, so to speak, just because it comes part of your life and your lifestyle to have this kind of other dimension of international friends and learning experiences, which for many of them is an ongoing experience, not just something you do for a couple of weeks in order to hit a milestone or to hit a test. And yeah, I'm super excited to speak about AI in general and generative AI.
Great. well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. I think I have a set of questions that I'm going to run through, but I am not married to these questions at all, and we have a lot of folks joining us. So if there are any questions or topics that you'd like us to cover, please feel free to use the chat, and we'll get to them, or as many of them as we can. I think, typically a lot of the folks who join these calls are founders themselves and are looking for practical advice. And so I guess I'd like to start with Arnd and Jono, just to talk a little bit about the kinds of experiments you have been running, incorporating AI, and what kind of successes and failures you've seen, just to help people ideally avoid some of the failures and embrace some of the successes. And so Arnd, if you don't mind starting, if you could talk a little bit about what you guys are doing, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, for us, essentially AI and big data has been a big part of the application and a lot of the function areas we're doing in terms of safety, in terms of community moderation. And for us then, of course, last November was an exciting time when all of a sudden ChatGPT became more of a public phenomenon and lots of excitement around it. And then, among the first questions we got asked a lot is, hey, do people now prefer to speak with robots all day? Do they want to have lots of chatbot conversations instead of human ones with an AI teacher rather than human language buddies? And I'm not phrasing this a bit silly, but I think smart people can have a really strong case around this idea or this vision. And it's been something that has been with us on our journey for a long time. How would it be to have also a single player mode in something like Tandem, the stability of a reliable language teacher or language coach you could chat with when your human partner is not available? And wouldn't this be a great experience in addition? And so this has become all of a sudden quite quickly a topic that became quite realistic, even though it was a discussion for a long period of time. And we saw that Duolingo essentially repositioned their entire social team to just do this type of AI type experiences. Memrise launched something like this as a company. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar, Character AI, where you can have lots and lots of different chatbots that you configure yourself. And among the more popular ones there are language teacher chatbots. And so that was essentially the first question we got all of the time. And I think here for us, the first really important lesson, or one thing that we maybe did pretty well, was to say, let's test this in a really fast and really simple way to validate this hypothesis of a single player mode and how far we can get with chatbot conversations and get to results and direction on this quite quickly. And so we went with this for a pretty hacky integration with a third-party chatbot. So we didn't have to do everything from scratch ourselves. There was a lot of curriculum built into it already, and at least got to the result that this experience itself wasn't interesting for our members and not what they expected pretty early on. It was very visibly an interesting novelty. Lots of people tried it, and even more people than we expected tried it and started it. But conversations were much smaller and shorter than conversations with real people. And the retention of the feature wasn't there. Also, it didn't look very promising in terms of its monetization potential. And also, that's a quite crucial point here, because querying OpenAI APIs is not cheap. And so you have to have a solid business case around something like this. And so for us, it became clear within a matter of maybe 6-8 weeks that this is a stretch, and this is maybe not really the way generative AI is going for us. And there are some companies who are making these kinds of bets on chatbots and on specializing precisely on this. And maybe they're also then attracting folks who are looking for exactly that. But for us, I think it was pretty early, pretty clear that this is not what our community really cares about the most. And I think for us now in day-to-day life, it's still an important vector, but the way we're looking at this, the kind of fun and hype aside, is that it's plain and simple one more new powerful piece of technology that we can consider using to solve all of the real actual user problems we are setting out to solve and all of the things we would be working on anyways. So it's one more addition to all of the tools in our tool belt, from normal machine learning, algorithms, user-generated content, community-based approaches, human processes that we can consider use case by use case and whenever we make up our minds on what we want to work on. But the first question is always, what are the most important user problems for us to work on? And then as a second step, consider if LLMs provide a new and promising, maybe even a step change in capability for the solution for this. But it's essentially not the starting point of the conversation, but one of the considerations in this. And
yeah. No, sorry to interrupt. I think in our previous conversations, I was always really interested by the fact that people think they want to talk to an AI bot, but actually and they're very excited about the idea. And then when they actually start talking to it, realize that it's not yet at the point where it's actually engaging, which I think is the piece that's missing for honestly real learning is to get people to stay on for longer. So it is quite productive, but not very engaging, or at least in this iteration. So anyway, I think, Jono, it'd be really interesting to hear how you guys are using AI, which I think is, I think it's just an interesting counterpoint, honestly, in terms of how you guys have integrated. So yeah, I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, and yeah, I think mine examples are going to be very, very pragmatic, I think, and practical. So I guess, yeah, everybody here has been excited about, trying ChatGPT for all sorts of things, just in their own, improving their own jobs and whatever they want to do internally. So loads of people with ideas, and so we wanted to try and find ways that we could start testing some of these and go, okay, actually, is there something really useful that we can do? The way we've had some success so far was we actually do like twice a year we do what we call a ship it day, which is like a 24-hour hackathon kind of thing, from Thursday at 2 to Friday at 2. You just 24 hours do what you want, work with a different team across the business, which was actually really nice because it was a way to connect something where people had lots of ideas, but it wasn't yet like part of their main day job to do, as a way to go try something. And so we have 2 AI features which are now running in the platform after checking that they were working okay. So the first one is essentially when new jobs are posted on our platform, it's time consuming to write information about the new jobs. So if schools are doing that, or if we're doing that internally, if we receive the information about this, and very often people don't actually write very much, and the consequences of that are both that teachers don't actually get a lot of information about what it is the job is, or the school, and also that we actually, a lot of these are published, and so we want them to appear in search, and so there's actually just very little information. So one of our wins was our marketing team were already in the background, had been sort of trialing lots of different approaches using ChatGPT to try and generate better job descriptions. And so what we did as part of the Shibboleth Day, we had essentially a front-end engineer and a back-end engineer and some product and design people looking on, plus the experts who'd already tried this many times. And we created essentially a button where once you've filled in all the information about the job that's necessary, we add lots of different bits about like the school. So we already have information about the school on the platform. We have information about Zen on the platform, and you can say, use AI to expand your job description, and then you can decide if you like it or not, and you can edit it and you can publish that. And so that actually has been a success. There were some challenges and there were some things that we learned while doing it, but that is running now on the platform, and actually has, I guess the main metric there for us was that it's actually helped our SEO, as far as we can tell, for our organic, which otherwise wasn't happening for these things. and perhaps we can get onto it later. But the other aspect probably that has, I think, worked quite well, but that's an interesting question always, is we get a lot of sometimes quite complicated questions around payments and pay queries and things for teachers on the platform, and that can take up quite a lot of time. And also people are asking these at funny hours and things like that. So one of the things we did, we actually used so Zapier have like build an AI chatbot where you can feed it your own data essentially, and so we curated and fed it all of the content we had and prior conversations around payment queries and things like that. And so then we made that available. We have 500 to 1,000 teachers using that every week at the moment, and ostensibly providing some value from it. But I think you're getting some value from it. But I think it's an interesting question how you monitor these things going forward and how you check that they're correct and it's actually is doing the job that you think it's doing. So that's, definitely an interesting learning. But those two things are actually running and generating value for us right now. We're not changing a huge language learning model. We took these two specific things and we wanted to see if we could get some useful benefit from it. And so far we have.
Great. No, I think that's great. I mean, it's quite specific and practical, which is awesome and working. So that's even better. And so yeah. I mean, Kirsten, I think you have the benefit of talking to a lot of startups that are sort of experimenting in the space. Would love to get you involved in the conversation and see, how what Jono and Arnd have described dovetails with what you've seen, and whether you have any additional kind of techniques that have proven particularly successful or catastrophic, either way.
So Arnd mentioned two words that keep coming up when I think about this, which is retention and monetization. So I've talked to and worked with quite a few startups, some of whom are doing better on this than others. I'm thinking of a recent example of a startup that failed to get funding. And I think part of their challenge was as many startup founders are, super excited by the tech and the potential for it. And I think the idea there was strong. But when it actually came to showing retention, never mind monetization, can you get some users to come in and stick around for more than a few weeks? Not really seeing it. Where I'm seeing startups have more success is where they've been going for a little bit longer and they have something core to what they're offering. And the generative AI supports that or augments it in some way. So whether that's accent reduction or helping people with a core homework problem. But if they'd come in just with the generative AI component at this point, I think they would be struggling. I mean, just to stick with language learning, which is my topic. I'm really excited about the potential for generative AI. I'm learning Spanish at the moment. I'm paying a very, very good tutor quite a lot of money per hour. And just like Arnd, I do believe that talking to real people is absolutely what language learning is about, and robots are never going to replace all of that. But one of the reasons I love my tutor is because he forces me to do the kind of rote learning, conjugation of verbs, that a lot of teachers, they see you struggling, they see you're not enjoying it, so they don't do it. But he forces me to do it, and I'm getting better at conjugating verbs. I'm getting better at using tenses that I try to avoid. Now, I could be doing that with a chatbot with generative AI for a lot less than I'm paying per hour. And then I could spend my hour where I'm paying this human tutor to have a more sort of interesting cultural kind of conversation. So I'm still super excited about the potential for generative AI, not just in language learning, in maths, and in pretty much every subject, actually. But I see the future of it and the potential for it being a blend with whether it's good content, whether it's targeted assessment, whether it's having a meaningful conversation with a human about the culture of the country you're interested in. And I see the AI augmenting that. And here's where monetization comes in. That's challenging. But it's provided the core part of what you're offering provides real value to the user, you'll have a route to monetization. I'm not yet 100% certain that something that's just pure Gen AI at this moment is going to open the floodgates for cash to come pouring in. Not that anything necessarily opens the floodgates for cash to come pouring in edtech, but it's tough. It's tough out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I think there was a couple of questions in the chat around, is the goal really to get people to stay longer? Are we talking about how do you think about productivity? My view is almost, having been investing now in education for well over a decade, everybody wants to know stuff. Much fewer people are enamored with the idea of learning things because it takes a long time, right? And so it's not that, ideally we would have matrix like technology where, you push a button and, information just pops up in your brain. But, most of the things worth learning take time. And so that's why we focus on iteration, right? Language learning is a perfect example of this. Very few people are able to pick up languages in short periods of time. And so, it takes, so the amount of time that you spend with learning is a good proxy for how much you're learning, basically. So the ability to engage people on those kind of topics are is really a good proxy for whether you are actually delivering value. But I guess more broadly, Kirsten, in your experience, how can startups, kind of validate whether the AI enhanced features are actually benefiting the learner? What kind of metrics beyond time spent are most salient in your opinion? And I'll turn it back to Jono and Arnd afterwards. But yeah, we'd love to hear how you think about it.
This speaks to a bigger challenge in edtech, which is showing efficacy, essentially. And I don't think there are specific KPIs that relate to AI. I tend to think of AI, whether it's generative AI or another type, as just another feature in a way. So when I was at Busuu, the way we tried to measure whether people were learning from whatever feature we were learning, whether it was personalization, whether it was a new type of content, we did pre-test, post-test experiment design. We were quite rigorous about that. We took a cohort of users. We tried to control the environment. So it was the feature in question that we were measuring, lots of different things. Very hard to do that. Showing learning gains, showing efficacy is super hard. But we did this kind of pre-test, post-test design, and we sometimes did A/B tests as well. But you need to be very rigorous. You need to isolate the component you're interested in, look at how people are performing with it or without it, or before it and after it. And you need to be prepared for those results, not always to be positive, and then to go back and iterate. But I'm not aware of sort of specific learning metrics that apply to AI. To me, it's all about designing rigorous experiments and being honest about the results. This in all experiment design.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. What about you, Jono? You mentioned that that you have this bot that's answering questions about payments for teachers, and it's hard to know how accurate those responses are. How do you think about? Payment. I'm saying it in a glib fashion, but payment is obviously an important topic for everyone. How do you think about that in particular, and more broadly, I guess, what are you guys looking at in terms of metrics of success for these kinds of experiments?
Yeah, I do think it's really interesting. And in some ways, you talked about extending time and retention on people spending more time in these conversations. For us, I think most of the opportunities are the opposite. We're essentially trying to save ourselves time and make things quicker for the people who are using the platform. So mostly, in terms of actuals, are we doing our jobs faster is kind of part of what we're measuring. In terms of the actual, the quality of the response, I think it's really interesting. And actually, I think for both of the things that we've put in, it's very difficult. you just can't put something in without some sensible way of measuring and monitoring whether it's working or not. In some sense, we have, for like our job description thing, we actually have like qualitative review from experts built in, because we've got people who are using this, they get a response and they decide whether or not to just press the button on it or not, and they decide whether to edit it. For the chatbot, you have things like, just like with ChatGPT or something, you can rate the conversation and decide whether or not you can tell us whether or not it's good or bad. What we find there is typically it's not really related to the quality of the conversation. It's how frustrated you are with the outcome or the answer. So we get a few people saying, no, we really don't like this, but that's usually because I don't know, they asked a question about references and their ones weren't valid or something like that, but they're just frustrated. And we tend to not get a lot of positive feedback, and might because it's quite difficult to do that. And so we have adopted some like regular reviews with all of these responses. So like, yeah, the question is, how do we know this is still providing good answers? Well, actually, at the beginning, when we put it in place, it did provide some bad answers because we were testing it very hard in those first few days, and we had to go tell it that these are wrong and you need to change the answers. And we got it to a point where we think that most of the 95% plus of the time it's providing useful and accurate responses. But we do still have a review process in place where we can review the conversations, and we are reviewing the feedback that people can provide to say, is this good or is this bad? But other than that, just like AI is just it's a tool in the box that we're using. We're measuring the same core metrics for, well, is this helping people get through their journey? Is this helping people, not have to go into customer support in the future? Is this helping people get paid on time? It's those kind of fundamental business metrics which we're looking at, and like, has this affected this positively or negatively? And that hasn't changed. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that it does. It does. Is that kind of aligned with the way you guys are looking at it, Arnd? Is it in terms of I mean, I think that's how you were describing it before, is you view it as a tool, you measure it against the same sort of metrics that you measure other tools, and kind of go from there.
Precisely. I think it's spot on what both of you said from our experience as well. Just have, make up your mind of what success looks like for the thing you want to solve against, and then rely on those metrics. I think specific to AI, one of the things we've been happy with as well was letting a percentage of the AI decisions run in a kind of shadow mode, whereas the humans or traditional processes score it like they did, so that we have essentially a comparison metric afterwards, how the AI performed compared to the traditional or even human process. Then maybe on the language learning side specifically, as Kirsten said, this is immensely difficult to measure well. How much progress does a language learner make? And how do we find out without being extremely extrusive about it? Here we're seeing, I think, some very interesting possibilities from LLMs to also help rate language proficiency, help rate typical mistakes that people make, so that essentially the LLM itself can become helpful in assessing progress as well, which is one of the things that has always been quite difficult, and it aligns quite well with our overall vision in relation to language learning, also quite similar to what Kirsten already explained. It's essentially a sidekick, a buddy, a tool, a co-pilot that helps you on your language learning journey together with your tandem partner, that essentially keeps you talking about the right things, but also helps you notice recurring mistakes that you can make, where it's not essentially the AI teacher, but rather a helpful companion that gives you more meaningful feedback on it. And there, I think, is what maybe is able to close the loop on the learning proficiency. But it's a very, very different use case to what we're doing, let's say, in customer support, or when it comes to matching or community safety KPIs.
And has there been any, I mean, from a technical or product perspective, has there been any particular challenges? You mentioned that you had you partnered with a third party who for the bot, basically, to kind of shortcut that process and quickly test what the response might be from your users. But were there any particular challenges around that, or other aspects of this, or do you feel like, from a technical perspective, it's again, there's no, I don't know, it'd be great to hear more about what you're seeing on that side.
Yeah. So I think, like, for these real world use cases, of course, an own implementation is quite instrumental. So, but essentially it's all very, let's say, unrevolutionary. It's essentially part of the cloud compute stack. So it also lives in Microsoft Azure or AWS as one more API at this point that you can utilize quite similarly to how the way you're utilizing other APIs. Build a bit of a specialized service around it. I think right now it's actually quite interesting that the open sourced Llama 2 model from Meta is widely available, alleviating some of these cost concerns potentially. So we're quite interested to switch or test to switch some processes to this, just to understand the performance in comparison to something like GPT 3.5 a bit better. If benchmarks are to be believed, it should be similar. And here you have essentially a step change in cost where you can more or less host this on your own infrastructure, and it isn't an awfully complicated process for a data engineer to get that up and running.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I would expect the cost to come down. I think the question is, there's always going to be like a premium, more functional model, and maybe eventually that functionality gets to be worth paying for it. But I don't know. Kirsten, I don't know, have you seen any particular challenges on the technical side or otherwise in terms of just running these experiments themselves? Particularly with early stage startups. I mean, I think what you read now is AI makes it possible to have a 2-person startup that gets super, up and running and, productive, and it can dispense with a lot of the other team members. I'm not sure I've actually seen that, but I've certainly read it. So yeah, I would love to hear kind of what you're seeing on the ground.
This is a question always asked founders, because I think for some of them, they're getting this stuff for free or close to free now, but how stable is access to these LLMs and these tools going to remain in the future? I think there's a big question about that for some startups. What I'm also seeing in larger companies actually is interesting discussions with legal teams about, can we use OpenAI to do our work? And legal teams coming back and saying, well, who owns it? And are you giving them our data? And there being this sort of standoff. And then people within companies going off and setting up their own account on ChatGPT, and basically everyone's using it, but they're not necessarily using it within company policy or understanding what they're giving access to and what they're receiving in return. So it's all a bit of a Wild West and a mishmash and a mess at the moment, with a lot of interesting and exciting stuff happening, and some of it being there's a lot of internal skunk works happening in larger companies that in some ways it's more interesting, I think, than what's happening with these small 2-people startups. So no doubt in a year's time this will all be a little bit clearer, but right now it's a big old mess, I would say.
Yeah, no, I think what I've felt, although this is very anecdotal, is that generative AI seems to be one of the technologies where CEOs get very excited about it very quickly, and then they just decide somebody has to do something with this, right? Like somebody somewhere needs to implement this so that I can talk about it at the next quarterly meeting, and then the legal team, may come on a bit late and say, wait, do we really understand what's happening here? But the CEO has already decided, to some extent, I think a lot of the adoption. There's a broader adoption than there is productivity because you're just getting that mandate to do something, and then I think you're right. Like we'll see in a year or so how much of this stuff sticks. Although apparently enough of it is sticking right now for AI or OpenAI to have $1 billion run rate, which is quite revenue run rate, which is quite impressive. Yeah, I don't know, Jono. I mean, how does we'd love to hear from either a technical perspective or just more broadly how you guys thought about it. You mentioned that it came through a hackathon, which seems like a fairly organic way to try to experiment with this stuff. But yeah. If you want to talk about that.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned about the privacy. I have a friend who's a software developer at a finance company, and they were building a chat AI tool, and the day before they were due to launch it, they got cold feet about the privacy implications and the potential access and where the data was, and they pulled it and then spent a month building a fully in-house version. Just purely like, actually, what are we doing with this data? Where is it going to live? Who's going to be able to access this? And then suddenly people were worried about that. It was in terms of actually making it happen, I feel like for the use cases that we were starting with, which was relatively small improvements to an existing experience, it was very quick to do. I think the main thing that I keep coming up against is actually, I think the UI is really quite important for a lot of this stuff. So technically it was quite quick to do. But in terms of like communicating it to users, what's happening, where these answers have come from, if you're generating stuff and they're potentially going to use it, what happens if it's wrong? How do you clear it? How do you decide if you don't like it? How do you undo it? All of that, I think, needs to be built. And then there were some aspects which was interesting to me. We'd sort of been trying this internally. And if you just mess around with ChatGPT, I think one of the most interesting features is you can just sort of say, can you do that again for me? And it will come up with another thing which is slightly different. There's sort of like reliability, which is kind of strange. So you don't know what you're going to get, and if you don't like it, you can sort of ask it again. And so knowing that you're going to get like changes every single time you do it, in one hand, is really valuable. And we actually built a feature that enabled you to just say, okay, you don't like that one, try it again. But also being unsure about what's going to come out each time is a little bit unsettling, and you have to have sort of review processes in place for that. Like we'd really like to use it, I think, fundamentally in our matching. So, we spend a lot of time matching schools and opportunities with teachers. But there are some real questions about how do you do that where you are comfortable that you don't have an error rate, which is actually going to be really serious. And so that's something that we're thinking about, and how do we combine, the sort of more traditional, like say, rule-based or machine learning-based matching that we already have together with aspects of AI, but you still have some control and knowledge about what it's doing and what's going on, and so you don't end up, recommending somebody who, for example, doesn't have the qualifications or isn't eligible to work at a particular place. And I think that's really interesting. And then maybe I just add, we're actually also looking at, we have an internal data tool which I really like called Trevor, which allows sort of self-serve data analysis, and we've been exploring another one called Channel, which allows essentially natural language data querying, and it sounds great, but what they've built in, I think, in this process is really critical, is that you, first of all, if you ask a query of your data in natural language, how do you know? It'll give you an answer, but how do you know that it's
real? Right. Yeah.
And so there's a lot of time that you need to spend with some qualified experts, first of all, like reviewing all the stuff that's coming out and going, is that right or not, and correcting it if it's wrong. And other times potentially like teaching it specific things. This is how we think about retention. This is our core metric for retention, and teaching it that, or correcting things that are wrong. So it's like it has so much promise, but like I don't think you can do it without those additional checks around it.
And when you're teaching it, you're just basically running, it's not a technical process. It's basically a prompt process that you're going through in order to teach them.
But you can also paste bits of SQL and things like that. So it's more like having I guess the idea is it's like having a conversation with a junior analyst to explain to them, this is how we do it. But you can't do it without that. And of course, if you change the model, how do you communicate it to that and make sure that everything's coming around. So it's building trust in these systems and the UI around that, I think is really critical as much as perhaps the technical challenges, which, you know, for our use cases, we're very quick, to be honest.
Got it. Okay, I'm gonna switch gears because there's a question from the audience, which is, what do you guys think about applications of AI in less sophisticated developed education systems? I guess another way to say it is, there an opportunity to leapfrog in less developed educational systems, or do you think they're more likely to be left behind? And so I'll throw that open to anyone who feels like they want to tackle it. Okay, I'm gonna take silence as a vote of we know enough to know that we don't know on this, and I will also, I don't have much to add. Unfortunately, we focus, like I said, primarily on Europe, to a lesser extent on North America, and so don't have a huge or don't have any real value to add on this stuff. I will say that in terms of the customer discovery stuff, I think that's applicable broadly, like to the extent that you are using AI to accelerate the mechanics of distribution and sales, that seems more broadly applicable. In terms of the learning process itself, a lot of that would depend on the hardware that's available in those countries, and I just don't have enough knowledge to weigh in. So I'll with that, I guess more generally, if there's one more question, but before we get to that, is there any additional advice you'd give to entrepreneurs who are experimenting in this space, or anything more broadly that you'd like to make the audience available or aware of? That would be great. I'll toss it to Kirsten first, because I think she talked the least recently, and then we'll go from there.
I'm still musing over the last question, actually. I mean, I'm not an expert in developing markets, but I think there is, what I'm seeing generally is interesting arguments for, and I'm not sure I've made my mind up about this yet, generative AI democratizing access to information. So I'm thinking about, people who can't necessarily afford a tutor. Busuu was bought by Chegg. Chegg has a really interesting business model, which is now in human-driven. They now have a partnership with OpenAI, where they're democratizing help with exam questions or preparation for tests. You've seen what happened to their share price, because people are discovering they can use OpenAI essentially for free at the moment, rather than paying a subscription monthly. But just talking to young people, so many of them are using OpenAI to get access to information that would have been very difficult for them to access just a year ago, I think. And that has to be happening worldwide. I also, when OpenAI originally became popular, I thought, oh my goodness, this is really democratizing people who can't speak English as a first language, or are struggling to speak it as a second or third language. It's much easier for them to write and communicate now in pretty much perfect English using a tool like this, which is a form of democratization. Whether that will lead to you then being able to get a better job or access to stuff in more developed markets, I think remains to be seen. But there's strong potential there for these tools to democratize certain types of information and certain types of activity. But yes, I'm softer and naturally pessimistic, so I tend to think that disadvantage gets a bit entrenched, and there is definitely potential for these tools to increase the gap between the knowledge rich and the knowledge poor as well. So I'm a bit on the fence with this, which is why I'm taking time to answer. So yeah, I'm sitting on the fence. There's my answer for that question.
Okay. Okay. I think just again, there's another question from the audience. I'll turn this over to Jono, just because I think you guys work the most directly with teachers. And the question is, when creating AI products for teachers, how do you think about creating products/services for teachers, educators? What's the balance of pushing teachers to working in totally new ways versus building something that slots directly into how they currently work? And I get that you guys are more about the placing of teachers, but I think that the principle is the same. Are you trying to create new behaviors or basically augment existing behaviors?
Yeah, and definitely for now, like our view is all about the augmenting the existing behaviors. I think you find some people who are just really excited about the promise of this and really ready and experimenting to try something new. But I think, relatively speaking, they're few and far between. And I think the most obvious wins are going to be the ones where you can just make something be a little bit easier, a little bit faster, and just speed up what they're doing. And I'd much rather have I don't know, there's something in UX design that I like to bring up, which is this idea of your technology is showing. And generally speaking, like, good design should be like almost invisible. And so I don't think necessarily like you want it to be like, oh, this big intrusive, oh, here you can do this, or you can do AI. I feel like it should be doing what you're doing, and if you're doing it just much easier, is the way I think we're generally going to be approaching this. And so we're not trying to create some whole new behaviors yet, and no doubt that might happen. But I think for quite a long time we're going to be augmenting what teachers are already doing.
Yeah, I think as a general principle, it's easy. You're pushing a rock uphill if you're trying to get folks to change what they're doing, and convince them that it's going to be better when they do. So okay, great. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? I don't know if Kirsten or Arnd, if you guys have opinions about getting teachers. I'll just pause for a second. No. Okay. So I think with that, we have about 5 minutes left. So I think I'll give each of you a chance to just either share something that you think people should know that you haven't talked about yet, or alternatively, just comment on sharing your experience with finding the talent that can actually implement this stuff. If you have any tips or tricks on how to bring people into your organization who can help you incorporate this. So I'll start with Arnd.
Sure. So yeah, I think for us it was mostly about the question: how do we get the entire organization to understand this new solution vector and this new way of thinking about potential solution to existing problems better, and rather than hiring people with a new skill set, or like prompt engineers with half a year of experience in prompt engineering. I think all of this can very quickly be adapted by the team that you already have and who are familiar with working with new tools and new capabilities anyways. What worked also for us, like Joe said as well, quite well, was the hackathon week, to just get people ideate a lot of ideas and experiences. And what made this really quite cool, for the example of the generative AI hackathon, was to have actual real users judging the projects at the end, because that was kind of a noticeable difference between the kinds of projects internal teams get excited about because it's a creative, clever way to implement technology, or it's very closely related to a business problem we're relating, in contrast to what then actual users resonate with. And so it wasn't the flashy games or so that people wanted, but a better way to organize their flashcards was, I think, the winning project, so that it essentially helped language learners with a relatively mundane but tedious little thing. And I think here, this didn't have to evolve into a product, but essentially helped us a lot to just have everybody in the team have hands-on experience with implementing this and thinking through use cases, rather than hiring. And yeah, hiring, if there are any product managers out there, we are hiring for a new senior product manager, not with an AI focus per se, but it's of course one of the things one is tasked with. But yeah, if anybody's interested in working on product at Tandem, there's a good opportunity at the moment to join. So feel free and very invited to apply if that sounds interesting.
Great, and I just posted a link to that for folks who are interested. So great, Jono. What about you? Any parting advice or thoughts about where to source talent?
Yeah, I guess my parting advice would be to ask the tricky questions if you're going to use AI in like really critical applications. There's a framework that I really liked. It was from a few years ago, so things have changed a bit, which was about machine learning. It was a talk by James Smith, who's a group PM at Google. And he said basically people will come to them because he did machine learning and say, I hear you have magic pixie dust. Can I have some of that? And then he had this sort of set of questions that he would run through, which is like, do I have data suitable to power a solution like this? Like, is it accurate? Is it unbiased? Does it reflect the population? Do I have a problem that can't be solved with pre-programmed rules? And he was asked, like, have you tried 50 if statements? Because that'll be less complex. It'll be maintainable and understandable to people. Does it require personalization? Are users comfortable not knowing exactly how a product functions? And will users tolerate errors in my product? And I think those are just such key questions when you get down to really critical critical applications of AI. Is like it will go wrong, guaranteed. So how do you protect against that? And I think a lot of that actually is in around the UI and the presentation of these interfaces, so that you're being really clear about that. So that's one of the things I would encourage people to think about when they're looking at applying AI. And in terms of talent, I've not come across people who have like real specialisms in generative AI and bringing that in yet. And so it's not something we've looked at hiring. But I will say that I find lots of individual pockets of people who are very passionate about this and are doing this like on the side. They're so excited about it. They're building applications in their free time. And I feel like in our company, it's as much about finding those people who already have that interest and talent and bringing them together to work on this. Externally, I'm afraid we haven't explicitly sourced for that as a role just yet. We are hiring for a senior PM role as well, though. So if you're interested in working at Zen.
That's good to get those out there. And I will shamelessly plug our own panel. Actually, I think we have a panel as part of the festival, which is specifically around hiring engineering talent and finding engineering talent. So if you're curious about that, definitely attend. Kirsten, I'll leave it to you in terms of just parting advice or thoughts around talent in the space.
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, Arnd already mentioned that you need to validate that there's a real user problem you're solving. But I would add to that, you need to validate pretty quickly whether this is something that people are prepared to pay for. And also, a mistake I'm seeing a lot is not looking at the route to market. Language learning is a very crowded space. For example, I see people pouring into this space with great ideas, great products, but no idea at all on how they're going to get it in front of people. And that's something really important to validate. In terms of hiring, at Busuu, we opened an office in Spain, and fantastic talent in that country. So I would suggest looking outside of the market and the base if you're able to do that. There's lots of ways of accessing talent in other markets now. Yeah, and look for passion. We are one of our greatest data scientists. We found him doing a podcast in education. So yeah, look for passion. And I always say there's probably going to be a bunch of startup founders on the market with lots of great expertise in the next year as they discover that they don't have route to monetization or route to market. So yeah, keep your eye on those people because they're going to need a job quite soon.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for that. Thanks everyone for participating today. It's been a pleasure. I will add one last thing because there was a question about what we're looking for, what VCs are looking for. So I think what I'm looking for more than anything else is in terms of generative AI that can hold people's attention. I think I mentioned that earlier, but if not something that just does a task for you, of which there's a lot, but something that actually helps you to learn directly. And I think that I haven't seen as much of. So with that, I'll leave it. Thanks again for participating in this session. This is the first session of 6 that will happen this week. So please tune into the other ones. And thanks specifically to Jono, Kirsten, and Arnd for their time. It's been really interesting for me and hopefully helpful for others.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, guys.
Thanks so much. Take care, Ben.
Thanks.
Ciao.
Thanks, panel. Thanks,
Bye, everyone.
Ben. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and hopefully see you later in the week.